Hello, welcome to Zine, a creative narrative practice. I am Kelly Hall, Program Specialist for Arts and Basic Curriculum, and we're so excited to have Elizabeth Dulemba. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, Elizabeth.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Dulemba. Folks call me E. I am the illustration professor here at Winthrop University. I've been here for 2 years now. I was a children's book author and illustrator for about 20 years before I went back to get my MFA in illustration at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm about to finish up my doctorate at the University of Glasgow in children's literature. So that also completes my BFA, which was in graphic design. And I am in my triptych of being a writer, illustrator, and graphic designer. So I love being here at Winthrop and sharing my professional expertise with students, especially. We have such a wonderful student body here in South Carolina, and I'm really glad to meet all of you and be part of your community. So hopefully I'll be able to share some good ideas with you today that you can employ in your own classrooms.
Thank you so much. So we're going to start out with a wonderful 6-minute video about making a zine. It's going to give you some context about what we're going to talk about today.
Hi, today we're going to make a zine. A zine is like a little magazine or a mini book, and it's a lot of fun. It can be used in tons of different applications, and it's used in 2 different ways in our project. So the first way to work a zine is you can either start with an A4 or an A3 piece of paper. I think an A3 is actually better for little hands, but we're going to demonstrate on an A4 today. Now there's an attached diagram about how to make a zine in our kit, which says to fold the paper long ways. We found that kids have a little bit of trouble with an A3 folding it long ways, but you can do it the other way as well. So we're going to do just folding it on the short side today. And the trick is to line up the corners nice and square, get them nice and even, and fold paper in half. Now the trick with a zine is to make sure that all of the seams are nice and creased very tightly. That will come into play as this goes along. So you can take this piece and fold it in half again. So get those corners lined up. There we go, get that nice and tight. So we've ended up with this. Now we are going to go back and do the long ways fold this time because it's going to make this a little bit easier, but you can see they fold the other direction. So we're going to, because we've got those nice tight folds, we can do the long ways a little bit easier this time. So you end up with this nice long shape that you can fold in half. All right. So now you're going to fold the sides back. That's going to create either an M or a W. So we're going to fold this one this way. There we go. You can see how that worked. Now we're going to fold this one the other direction. Nice tight fold. Now the trick I said is also that those seams need to be really tight and they need to go both directions. So we're going to open this back up and we're going to fold everything the other direction. So long ways the other way. And because I made those nice and tight, this is not too hard to do. You can see everything folds that way. So we're going to do it the other direction, and the other direction for this one as well. So what you end up with when you open it up is 8 panels, which all books are divisible by 8 because of the printing process. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so the next idea is we need to cut a hole right through the middle right here. Now, a nice little cheat to make this a little bit easier is to fold it back in half. And at that intersection in the middle of the paper, just take your scissors. These are nice safety scissors, and put a little divot into the paper right there like that. That'll help you get a hole to get the scissors started. So you can see how there's a hole right in the middle of the paper. So then you cut, not all the way, but only to the next seam. So you can see just a little bit, just to there. Right, and you turn it over and do the same. What you end up with is a little mouth. You can see, I'm going to just get these nice and collapse scene. So you can see that it ends up like a little thing that can talk, like a puppet, and it can talk to you. Kids love that part. So make sure that's really fun. When that is pointing out, that's going to create a shape that works for you really well. So grab it here and grab it here. And you can see already something's starting to happen. The whole thing is starting to collapse and create kind of a star shape. You can see what's happening there. And when you fold it down, boom, you've got a book. And it doesn't matter where you fold it over. You can fold it over there, over there, over there, but you end up with your little zine, just like that. So let me show you that one more time, because that's the part that people kind of get hung up on a little bit. So you've got your little piece of paper with the mouth cut into the middle of it. It's talking to you. All right, hold it at the top of the mouth, at the bottom of the mouth, and everything's got to be nice and tightly folded. And you can see, if you fold that in half, it starts collapsing down into a book. So there's your little zine, and you've got a cover. So we're going to write cover on here, right there, and you've got a back. And you have interior pages. So you've got the beginning of the story, the escalation of things happening in the story, the climax, and the resolution, if you want to teach from writing. But you could also use this as a passport, where they have kids sign from different countries or learning different words, or you could have different monsters or creatures from different cultures and have kids write the names of those monsters in different languages. It can be used in lots of different ways. Another thing that you can do is once you have your story done, you'll notice that when you open it up, and I'm just going to put some images on here so that you can see how this works. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages on the inside. Okay. Now you'll see though, when we open this back up, let me get my pen out of the way. When we open this back up, they're all on one side of the paper. They're not on the other side. So what do you do with the other side? You can take an idea. Like if there are a lot of different things going on the inside of the book, you can take one collated idea and make a poster on the other side. Or you could do an activity, maybe a racetrack or some kind of game. You can use it in all different kinds of ways. So it's a really good project to have not just a book, but also do different activities with the poster. So there's your little zine, and you can have all kinds of possibilities, things and projects to do with them. And once you learn how to do this, it's not just going to work with our project, it'll probably work with all kinds of different applications that you can think of. So I hope you enjoy making zines with your students, and thanks so much. Cheers.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Oh, I just love this.
You're welcome. It's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. I really am interested to hear. I already see so many ways that this could go in a classroom, but I really want to hear from you ways that you've used this within schools and within the work that you've done.
Right. So it's really appropriate for all ages. I've used it with the very young and adults. So I've in schools, like I said, the passport idea, that was because the project that I filmed that particular video for was called a translanguaging project. And these were kids, this was while I was in the UK. And the kids were, from all over the world, and they would come into a class and they wouldn't maybe speak English quite as well as the others. And that was a very vulnerable position for a lot of these kids to be in. So by creating the passport idea and having the other kids, having to go to them to know how to say a word or to know the monster from their mythology or whatever, it was very empowering for those individual kids because suddenly they were the expert at their own culture or their own language. So that was a wonderful tool for them at a very young age. We also used it in a class about, we were doing books on interesting scientific studies that led to breakthroughs interesting environmental studies that led to interesting medical breakthroughs. And the kids were doing their own little booklets and drawing on the pages, but also for adults, you get into using it as an actual writing tool. Because like I said, in the stages of writing, one of the main templates that we use when we're teaching writing is that Shakespearean 3-act play kind of structure, which has the introduction, 3 moments of escalation towards a climax and then a resolution, which is a really typical storytelling structure. So it works for even people who don't draw to just lay it out and see how their story breaks out. For artists, of course, you can go in and actually do, even if it's just stick figures, to see what are your key points of those stages within your storytelling. Are they working? You know, is it moving forward in a nice linear fashion? It's an extremely adaptable tool, but it's also got a following. A lot of people like creating zines just as creative outlets. So you'll find zine societies in different cities all over the world, where artists are using them as experimental booklets, and they trade them and sell them, and it's really got quite the following. So it's a big deal. Yeah.
I love that. I really love how it can make for, you know, a young artist or a young writer really feel like, oh, I'm creating my own miniature piece of work. I'm creating my own miniature book. I'm creating my own play. I really think that really makes
Exactly.
I could see a young person really feeling like they are the playwright, or they are the artist.
Exactly.
And that we have a question from Kim Wilson. So I am going to add her in as a spotlight here so that she can ask her question about zines. Go right ahead, Kim.
Hi, Elizabeth. So my background is in visual art as well. And I have to say, I have also seen zines, and they really are, they're a lot like those trading cards became very popular at one point. And through our work with schools, I've seen other teachers use this very effectively. Kids do love it. I have to completely applaud and support everything you've just said. But I'm going to ask a practical question for our teachers who may not be as experienced in the language of art. So when you spoke about A3 paper, let's talk about that typical classroom teacher who may not have the background knowledge in terms of sizes and thicknesses. So if you'll break it down into American terms, because we love our good old fashioned inches and
we do. It's an 11 by 17. That's all. So just something large, especially for those kids who want to have some space to draw on. A thicker paper is going to work better if you do the activity that has something on the back of it as well, because obviously a thin paper, it's going to bleed through, and you're going to have the images, you know, fighting with each other on each side of the paper. So thick paper, 11 by 17, you're good to go.
Thank you. We try not to assume, right? Especially we never know what our audience is going to be. And knowing that this was more of that sort of across the pond, you know, in terms of some of our differences. That's fantastic. So Elizabeth, specifically to your idea with the poster, with so many, again, trying to relate this with our teachers who integrate the arts in our classrooms. And they are oftentimes looking for arts standards of what's most important, and talking about those images within your projects. Was there a part of the assessment in terms of what were the teachers using? How are the teachers using those zines as assessments for those learning? And what advice would you give in terms of artistically, the advice to the teachers who might want to try this in their classrooms?
That's always a little bit tricky, because when you talk about art, how do you grade the things that are so relative? So what I typically use for grading standards is am I seeing that a student is understanding a new concept? Are they seeing that they are getting it? How deep is their understanding? When I talk about the idea of what they might draw as a poster, really that's the premise behind the story. You have the different phases of the story, but you also have the premise, the overlying meaning behind it, the elevator speech, the crux of the story. What does it mean? So that can get to the 30,000 feet level, the philosophical level of what is it that you're trying to say? What is this trying to do? What message is it trying to impart? So from that standpoint, it's really just about, is the student getting it? Are they putting thought and processing into it? Are they coming up with thoughtful responses? Are they, maybe weighing different ideas against each other to see which one's the most effective? things like that. I think that's always a good way. But truly, I mean, I get art students that are coming out at all different levels, and you cannot grade them on the same scale because that's not fair. And in the world of illustration, there's so many different venues that they could go into as a career. What I grade them on is their own progress against themselves. You know, how are each individual students progressing and evolving, because they're all going to do it at different rates. They're all going to go into different fields that have different requirements, different skill levels, that sort of thing. So you really just have to be knowing the individual and seeing how they're doing and progressing.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, because we can look at children's books where the illustrations are vastly different in terms of even, you know, sometimes little stick figures themselves, but is it communicating the story well? And
exactly,
that's more of the intent. So thank you so much for that, for that comment, because again, many of our teachers, well, many teachers who are new to arts integration often want to back off of the art piece. They don't know how to engage in the conversation. So I appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Great, good.
Elizabeth, you mentioned, and can you hear me? I had a little bit of issues with my earpiece, so I just took it out and we're rolling forward.
Okay.
You mentioned your work with the multilingual learning. This was a part of multilingual learning and teaching project that you did in Glasgow, and you've talked a little bit about it, but I'd really love to hear a bit more about that project and how zines fit into that project. And I also have on ready, I know you have a resource that I can share as well. So I have that ready whenever you would like me to screen share that for you too.
Great. Okay. So in the UK, they have libraries where they will have kits available for teachers to check out, to be able to do activities around certain ideas, or even picture books, you know, whole kits with activities and things like that. So we came up with, this was a grant project on translanguaging, and we came up with a little suitcase, and it was, you know, the map of the world was on the outside of the suitcase. And inside were several different activities. There was a music element, there was an acting element, there was the zine element. So, you know, really trying to approach the information from several different creative angles. And a teacher could check this out, use it in their classroom for 5 weeks or however many that seemed appropriate, and then turn it back in. There were games in there as well. So the zine PDF that I hope you'll be sharing, which teachers can use as a visual of how to do this, was actually created for that little suitcase. That teachers could use. So, you know, they had little checkout things on all kinds of information. You could get, you know, Eric Carle's The Hungry Caterpillar would come with a bag with all kinds of activities in it. And you could just check these out. So some of them were more in demand than others. And we were hoping ours was going to be very much in demand, especially when you start thinking about the international aspect of the population in the UK, because, you know, it's extremely varied over there, which was one of the things I enjoyed about it so much. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It truly does, because some of our schools have used art carts, toolkits. I know with this virtual realm that we are in, they've sent home supplies, and what a wonderful piece to add into this with some instructions, with some video on how to do that. This would be a wonderful application, and not quite as costly, because you don't need expensive materials to make a zine, correct?
Yeah, I actually embrace them, you know, the projects that use the things that we throw away, you know, that we have so much of, you know, paper cups, things like that. You know, what we look at as trash that we can then turn into art in some ways, to me, some of the most fascinating the art that gets produced in society.
So teachers, another little piece for your tool bag. Throw this in your toolkit. Throw this in on your art cart. This is a wonderful tool that you can add to that. Thank you very much. And I do have that PDF for you, so you can check in the conference app, scroll down past this video to the bottom, and there is a place where there is a PDF attachment to go along with this. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for including that. So we've talked a little bit about kind of how this applies with some different content areas, and I'd love to hear not just from you but from our other participants as well. I'd love to open up a discussion about, you know, the impact of this on student comprehension outside of just the arts. We've touched on it, but I'd love to dig just a little bit deeper into that. So I'm going to let you start out, and I do want to open that up to our other two participants for some questions and conversation.
Okay. I guess one of the things that you could look at is I talked about this being a very typical story structure, the 3-act play, Shakespearean 3-act storytelling structure. That is not the only story structure that exists in the world. In fact, there's lots of them. Trickster tales are something that I haven't mentioned, but a lot of Native American or First Nations cultures have trickster tales, and they have a very different storytelling structure to them. In fact, in a lot of the Western thinking narratives, it is the protagonist in the story that has to go through a growth arc. Whereas in the trickster tales, it's the person who is hearing the story who is going through the growth arc. So the trickster isn't growing in the trickster tales. Whereas in the Western culture story structure, the protagonist has to grow, has to change. There has to be some kind of obvious evolution by the end of the story. So these are things that you can look at. You know, one of the reasons that I introduce these tools is because I do often give conferences to adults, and you know, they might have their basic story down, but something's not working. So you come at it with all these different tools to figure out what's not working. You know, why isn't it working? So this is one of those tools that really helps to just kind of break it into bits and parts to see what is working, what's not working. Is the escalation actually building tension? Is the climax actually satisfying? Is the resolution actually wrapping up everything that needs to be wrapped up? Is the introduction exciting and making you want to turn the page, or is it too droll and boring? You don't want to keep going, you know, all of these things. And I do want to give a plug for picture books, you know, since I created them for so many years and still do. It's one of the best ways to learn how to writing that exists, because every single word matters, and you have to milk down big ideas into very simple text. So if you want to become a good writer, you learn how to write picture books. And that means way beyond, you know, the typical prescribed demographic for picture books. You know, use them up into high school, use them in college. They are fantastic tools. And if they've been done well, they'll usually have layers to them. That, you know, there's the aspect of the story that reaches out to the children, but there's also the aspect that is reaching out to the adult who has to read it 20 times to that child. So they're wonderful tools to examine.
I know that my children love graphic novels, and we love picture stories in our house, and that, you know, that visual literacy is wonderful skill building.
Yeah. Well, think about it. We were visually literate long before we ever added words into the mix. You know, we were drawing animals on the caves, you know, and we are dealing with visual literacy everywhere in our world. Stop signs, clocks, you know, everything. It's the most important aspect of how we interpret our world and our environments.
Thank you. And so I just want to open it up. I know that Kim, I can see you ready to share some thoughts. I can just see it. So I'm going to add you in, and please join this wonderful conversation.
Yeah, Elizabeth, as I mentioned, was working with schools who had used these zines before. And just to piggyback on some of your ideas, and particularly in the high school level, there was a creative writing teacher who used this, and really with that, the liberty, maybe it was a little too liberal to some people's choice, but that intersection, the interplay of words, expression, size, color, variation, style with poetry. And they would use these little zines as, again, sort of unfolding a piece of poetry that students had written, and providing that reader the emphasis of where do I want to put the emphasis? How is the reader going to hear my voice in a different way than that spoken poetry? And then
that also speaks to timing. You know, I'm sorry to interrupt, but, you know, choosing that moment of highest tension, or where the meaning of what's trying to be put across is the most extreme. Choosing that moment, there's an art to it, and that's the one you want to illustrate on those pages. Yeah. So sorry, I interrupted your thought. Please.
That's great. I mean, I was really just so taken by those little pieces of artwork that her students were creating. On a more practical level, in terms of those elementary students, we see children draw those little life cycles. We see them all the time, right? And oftentimes they're just copies and replications of what they are seeing projected or in their textbooks. And that allowing students to use those zines to sort of unfold the story, maybe showing time over seasons, to really demonstrate how they're understanding time that passes in these cycles and what it might look like and what environment that they're in. So those are just two examples that I've seen in a classroom that just communicated very well and allowed the students to express more in that assessment than what a typical assessment may look like.
Yeah. And you don't have to be an artist to do them. They could be used just with words. They could be used with stick figures. It's all getting the same points across.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That kind of leads me to my next curious question. We talked about across contents, and I could even see this. I just want to add in, I could even see this in a science class, and plotting out, the process of, atoms, or the scientific process. Like, I could totally see this, and maybe a student using this to plan out their experiment. I could see this in math as well. Those word problems can always be a challenge for some students, and I could see them taking this and really breaking that word problem down through a zine to help them figure out how to. I know I had a student, one of my own children struggled with word problems, and it was because the literacy was what the challenge was, and having a tool to break down those word problems and being able to add some visualization to that, I think is really useful. So I love how this really can spread across contents. Before we move on, though, I do want to pause. Anything else we want to add about some other ideas that have popped up in terms of a cross-curricular thoughts about?
Well, it's funny what you just said about applying it to science, because another grant project that I worked on was talking about, and I mentioned it briefly, these environmental issues that turned into medical breakthroughs. And this was a project based on the Gila monster, that they found out through stories in First American nations that the Gila monster had been, there was some kind of healing aspects about it. And I don't quite know how they got there, but through studying the venom of the Gila monster, it turned out that there were applications for it to help diabetes, people with diabetes. So, a zine could be used to show the stories that are told that lead to a scientist going, what's this connection, to leading to trying to capture and get the venom from the Gila monster, and then seeing what that venom is, what's in it, and are there aspects of it that might have applications that hadn't been considered. So that's a linear framework that could be explained through a zine, but also shows a scientific process. So absolutely what you just said, Kelly, it does indeed work for that as well.
All right, one more to throw in there, and I promise I'll be quiet because my brain's just on fire. But,
Great.
Oftentimes our students are given those assignments of, go interview someone in your family. And I can just see this as unfolding family history. When you open it up, you can have a poster with your family tree of all the work that, all your research. So I'm sorry, all of a sudden it was just like, there's just
so many applications.
Yeah.
Great.
So many applications, and not just across content levels. So I know we're getting close on time, but I just want to take a few minutes to talk about, there's just so much here. It's so exciting to talk about how this is expansive, not just across content, but across grade levels as well. You mentioned that adults use this.
Oh yeah.
See this with younger children and everything in between.
I've used it for all of them.
So I just want to share some ideas and talk about how this spans across a grade level. This is not one particular group. Sometimes we do have activities that are very elementary, or very middle school, or very high school, or very higher ed. But this really does run across all grade levels and beyond.
It does. In fact, the Gila Monster project that I was telling you about, we actually did employ zines in that group. And they were, I want to say, third grade, maybe. So they had a blast, and they were drawing, what is this chemical look like, and of course it ended up being monsters and stuff like that. It was really funny, but even whatever it ends up being, it's just getting them to think, hopefully critically thinking about whatever topic it is that we're trying to relay to them. So yeah, and and when I say my students at conferences, I'm talking about people that are in their 70s and 80s sometimes. So I mean, it really goes the gamut. It's a wide range thing.
And I think we have a question from Scott Lycan. Scott, I'm going to add you to this conversation.
Ding.
Ding. Yes.
Yeah, no. So I am not thinking on all kinds of fabulous multi-tiered levels. I am in my small pigeonhole. I've got novice hostages in my classroom, not even young artists excited about experimenting with new things. I could guess what tool to introduce first in conjunction with the little zine, but do you have what 9 times out of 10, what's the most successful media choice with your zines? Just straight out, just pen and ink, or do you actually try to get them to format, ideas in a different way?
It has been whatever is on hand, anything from pencils to stickers. There's an artist out of Scotland. Her blog is called The Art Room Plant. She loves to do screen printing and relief printing and collage in little zines that she makes as little projects, and they're all just little mini subject matters. They're really wonderful creations, artistic creations. It really can just go the gamut. So whatever you have available to you is what you can use. Very flexible.
And to provide a little bit of background, I know what Scott is referencing to the high school Art 1. These are students who they have to take this class, right? And so sometimes they're coming in without that desire, motivation, and sometimes skill set, right? So
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I really appreciated what you just said in terms of stickers, because the horror, right, in art rooms. But if it starts with they can only use 1 sticker per page, and then they've got to somehow build something around that.
Sure. Or even a Zentangle. If you know what a Zentangle is, it's just basically, drawing a pattern that just builds out and out and out. It's whatever. I mean, okay, when you've got young students like that they're maybe needing to get that excitement level up, let them get their fingers messy, give them finger paints, give them brayers and screen print ink and foam things that can be stuck out and glued on, just let them play with stuff that's messy and engaging and fun, and just let them have a good time with it. Hopefully that will get them interested.
Well, and I promise I wasn't going to say anything, but here I am. Honestly thinking about that trading card, but almost in a zine platform. With printmaking, we often print, and then we print just ours, and we print a whole bunch of them. But it's almost like the passport. I made a print of that size, and then we can all print and leaf and have a booklet of a collection of our other classmates' prints.
Yeah, and you could trade them and swap them.
To get them to swap, trade, and then like you have a little art collection that you get to walk away with. So,
in fact, I do think there are some societies that do that. They'll create zines and actually do swaps, because I know a lot of artists do that in other mediums as well, and I think they do that in zines as well. So yeah, wonderful way to use them.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kim. I know elements of art are also one of those basic skills that students sometimes collect through an art journal or a sketch journal, and I think this is a great way to introduce those, that they have to demonstrate that maybe on each page, or I think this just
I do want to add something to
that. Abilities.
Yeah, Kelly, if you don't mind, one of the things that I'm hitting, especially with the college students that I'm getting, I always assign a sketchbook project that they have to fill a sketchbook by the end of the semester. And inevitably the freshmen are like, can I do this? Can I do that? Do I have to do it this way? Do I have to do it? And I'm like, this is your brain on paper. I can't tell you what it's going to be. You get to do whatever you want to do. That does seem to be a little bit counter to, you know, some of the regimented applications and lessons that they're going through in K-12. To give them that freedom, that space to just do whatever they want. So from that aspect, I think something like this, or like you said, a sketchbook or sketch diary is really important because they need that place where there are no rules. I think that's especially important with this generation. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, and as you were talking, it kind of made me think, you know, sometimes you have those students who are, you have jagged ends in your classroom. You have students that are early finishers, or you have students that, you know, are just running at a different pace. And wouldn't it be great to have just a little station set up with some paper and some pencils and some possibilities?
Oh, yeah.
You know, everybody builds that skill of making a zine, and then they're able to kind of carry that on their own. No matter what classroom that they're in. There's just so many possibilities. Well,
Yeah.
we're getting close on time, but I do want, I know you have some paper there with you.
Well,
And
I
share with us
made my
before we
own.
go. Look at that, live, in person with us right now, an actual zine. Can you believe it?
An actual zine. Well, and I'd forgotten how thorough my video was, but I really did cover everything in the video that I wanted to cover in this, you know, talking about using it as a writing tool. But, you know, I mean, this is just an 8.5 by 11. Obviously, it's not a big piece of paper, but it's just a simple little thing. Go make them and play with them. Have fun.
So it's not copy paper. It's a little bit bigger than that, than what you would find straight out of
the 11 by 17 is ideal. Yeah. This is, I mean, you can see this is really teeny, you know, that would be a little bit hard to use as a child or as a younger student that needs some space to spread out their ideas a little bit. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, before we let you get away, I just want to give everyone an opportunity to give some closing thoughts. So any last questions from either of our participants? Any final questions that you have for E here?
I'm watching the chat bar. It doesn't look like we have any, Kelly, but I would love to say thank you, Elizabeth.
You're
It
welcome.
is a
Thank you so much for
treasure.
asking me.
Yes, it's a treasure to highlight you as a new South Carolinian and here at Winthrop University and all the talents that you bring. We have, it's just such a natural connection between the visual imagery and our storytelling. And so
Well, and I was so
giving.
excited to hear about everything ABC has been doing and immediately wanted to get involved with you guys as well. I will add, please, if you have more questions, my website is dulemba.com. Please shoot me an email. I also have a newsletter you can sign up to. And I'm happy to, you know, talk to you further about this if you've got some questions. So just give me a holler.
So here's her
Yep,
website to reach out to her.
Yep.
I just want to make sure everybody gets that, dulemba.com. You also have, you're on YouTube. You've got some more things out there on YouTube, correct?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. I've started doing what's called E's Art Tips, and it started as the lectures that I wanted to give to my kids during COVID, since we're doing all this teaching online, so that I could have them pre-recorded lectures that basically to have multimodal aspects of pedagogy to share with my students. But it's also exploded into just, I'm having fun with it. So whenever I'm doing some of my art, I record my method and I put that up as tutorials, you know, demos, that sort of thing. So I'd love to have you subscribe there as well if you'd like to go check those out.
We can find you by name, correct? If we just search for you and we look for E's Art Tips.
Should come up. I hope so. Yeah.
So you get more than just zines in this session. You're getting some additional places to go and find some more resources and to reach out to E. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and sharing this fabulous activity, art piece, multi-grade level, cross-curricular zine with us. And I hope that it is I know it's inspiring to those within our network. And I just want to thank Kim Wilson and Scott Likens for joining the conversation with us today. We appreciate you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and thank you to all the art teachers out there. You're getting them ready for me. I can't wait to work with your students. Thank you all. Bye.